Welcome to the Money Mastermind Show. Let's talk money.
Welcome to this week's episode of the Money Mastermind Show. Today, we will be talking about millennials and the state of their finances and what you need to know about money, whether you're a millennial or even whether you're a Gen Xer or a baby boomer. Today, we have the Money Mastermind Show panelists. We have Kyle Prevost from youngandthrifty.ca. We have Peter Anderson from Bible Money Matters. And we have Tom Drake from the Canadian Finance blog. Glenn Craig from Free From Broke is not with us today. And I am Miranda Marquardt from Planting Money Seeds. I will be filling in as moderator. So let's see how this goes, shall we? Okay, so one of the more interesting items that have come across here in recent days is that there was a study done from PricewaterhouseCoopers, and they surveyed 5,500 people between the ages of 23 and 35 about their personal finance knowledge, the state of their savings, and the state of their debt, and their overall satisfaction with their financial lives. And what they found out was that millennials are not happy with where they stand with their money. According to a Forbes article about this subject, it says millennials owe a lot and they know too little. And she said that millennials also struggle with debt, and that may eventually become a problem. And I think one of the biggest debt problems is probably student loans. But here are some of the stats from the survey. It says 50% of those surveyed said they couldn't come up with $2,000 if an unexpected need arose, and 54% were worried about their ability to repay their student loans. So I thought that was a good place to start. Let's start with debt and let's start with savings. So Tom, let's start with you today. And what do you think is probably one of the biggest reasons that millennials are having this problem?
Well, the interesting thing about debt, though, is it really just millennials or is it everybody? Like, I know this study was only focused on a certain age, but I think debt's probably become a bit of a problem. And I know here in Canada, the percentage of or the dollar amount of debt that people are in has been rising quite a bit. So I don't know if it's necessarily just a millennial problem, or maybe if we're just picking on them a little bit.
That's a good point. Who among us has not been in debt? So what about you, Peter? What do you think about this new survey?
Well, I think it is student loans. I think that's one of the bigger issues that they're dealing with. They come out of college with I forget what the average was, with $25,000 or $30,000 worth of student loan debt just to get started, and you go from there. I was reading another study that said the millennial generation has a larger delinquency rate on their bills compared to all other age groups, and really, it just speaks to the fact that they are in debt and they're having a hard time paying those bills.
Well, and one of the things that I find interesting about that delinquency number, though, is how many of them have practiced paying their bills and understand what they need to do. Because I know somebody personally in my life who was like, well, I've secured an apartment, and I secured this apartment in December, but I'm not going to be there for December because I'm going to be home for Christmas. So I don't actually need to pay for my apartment till January because I'm not living there. And think about that for a minute. I'm like, no, it's your apartment. Even if you're not there, you still have to pay rent. And I wonder how much of that delinquency is a little bit of not practice paying for these things. I don't know. What about you, Kyle? What do you see? I know that you're a teacher, so what are you kind of seeing with these trends?
I think just, and as a teacher, I'm biased, of course, but I think it's overall just a complete lack of education. And I think that's not necessarily unique to millennials. I just think it bites millennials harder because the post-secondary stakes are higher. The buying the first home, at least in Canada at this point, is higher stakes as well. And so these initial financial decisions are just maybe we were all dumb when we were 17, 18, 19, 20, but they just have more severe repercussions now maybe. And the job market is pretty bad. I've heard different variations of how to measure a job market, and that it was worse in such and such a time. And I don't want to get into comparing generations because I've heard too much of that lately, but suffice it to say that at least again in Canada right now, the job market for youth is bad, and it's bad for a lot of people with post-secondary credentials. So
I don't know, Kyle. I mean, I think you're the only millennial here. I think the rest of us are Gen X. So
it's 3-on-1 here.
Maybe we need to gang up on you a little bit.
I kind of wonder how much of it is they don't have the education in order to make the right decisions, compounded by the fact of the time they're living in. You know, a lot of them grown up seeing their parents lose their homes to foreclosure, and the market's dropping and tanking, and people losing their retirement accounts and so forth. And one study from Wells Fargo showed that millennials showed that 45% of them were not even saving for retirement at all. And the ones that are saving, I think I mentioned this in another episode, but the ones that were saving, a lot of them were saving their money in fixed income and cash type investments, as opposed to maybe what they should be, in stocks and more long-term investments. So, it kind of seems like they're maybe a little gun shy, and compounded by the fact that maybe they don't have the right education in order to be making the right decisions.
And I think you made a good point. All of this kind of messes together. I mean, you've got these high student loan debt rates because the cost of college has been skyrocketing recently. I mean, I remember when I graduated from college, and the average amount of debt at that time for student loan debt was right around $15,000. And it's almost doubled since then, and it's only been, oh, never mind, it's been a while, but it's only been like 11 years since I graduated from college, and already that average number is much higher than it was before. And so I think that kind of combines with, like you said, they're gun shy. It's a very tough time, I think, to be coming out, because you're immersed in media. They're immersed in media. They're constantly consuming this news about, oh my gosh, the stock market dropped. And we all know that nobody pays attention to the stock market, the so-called stock market, except for the Dow. And that's not even representative. And so it just sort of compounds. But one of the things that I found interesting was the study indicates that millennials have a retirement account in about the same number as American workers who are automatically enrolled in workplace savings accounts, but some of them have been taking hardship withdrawals from the retirement accounts. So while we're talking about investing, what is one of the biggest problems about taking that withdrawal? I mean, you think you need the money. Tom, what do you think about that?
Well, I did something, I'll call it similar, but it's actually better. In Canada, I was able to take money out for the home buyers plan out of the RRSP. And in my case, it's something that's a little less frowned upon, but you're still taking money out that you could be earning. It's kind of that opportunity cost of when you pull money out. At least in my case, you can put it back. I'm not sure about how what you were talking about works, but can you put the money back?
Yeah. Well, you can. You can take a loan, and if you take a loan, you have to pay it back, and you pay interest back into it. But if you take an early withdrawal, that's different. You have to pay taxes on it and a penalty. Yep.
Yeah, and here in Canada with RSP, you lose the contribution room if that were the case. But so what I did, at least it was something I can pay back into without losing that contribution room. But the opportunity cost for sure is kind of missed.
Yeah. So what are some of the other issues, though, that any of you might see when it comes to, and not just millennials. I mean, I know we're kind of picking on Kyle and his generation a little bit, but what are some of the other issues that maybe we see in money, whether they're in their 20s or their 30s?
I think compounding further the gun shyness on the investing front is the severe distrust in institutions. It seems to be like one of the defining characteristics of the millennial. And by the way, it's not an illogical position, frankly. When you see what's going on in both the American major institutions and some of the Canadian institutions as well, I don't think that's an illogical position to lose trust in some of those former touchstones. With that being said, it doesn't manifest itself well when talking about banking. If you don't trust, then there's no reason to save for retirement, because you're not trusting that these major banks or institutions will sort of take care of your savings and grow your savings, and you have no trust in sort of the way that you've traditionally managed things. So then you never engage with it. It's easier to just push it to the back burner, take early returns from your retirement account, because who cares if you get taxed on them? You're not earning enough to pay taxes anyway in many cases. So it just becomes a very easy sort of logical loop to fall into of sort of defeatism and non-trust, and it can sort of rapidly lead to this weird open letter war that we were talking about before the show. That maybe Miranda, you can give some background on what I'm talking about here, because I'll just start swearing soon.
We could use a little more swearing in our no, I'm kidding.
No.
Somebody has to edit that out, and it's
I have to edit that out, please. No.
No, I just remember there was somebody wrote an open letter to her CEO about, I can't remember what. I thought it was stupid. That I thought all the responses were like you, Kyle. I thought all the responses were stupid, and I said I don't have time for this anymore. But yeah, it was. Let's see. Why don't you tell us about it, Kyle?
Yeah, well, essentially, this girl thought that her boss had done her wrong, and wasn't good, and so then she was fired for non-related reasons, apparently, soon after. Which, like, hello, yeah, you were. Of course you were. Like, what did you think was going to happen at that point? And then this other millennial comes on and takes her on, and they both get a ton of followers on social media. I'm sure it worked out great for both of their freelance writing careers. And maybe I should start writing open letters. I don't know. And anyhow, all of a sudden now I see popping up, every blogger's got their own take on this, and there's a martyrdom complex. And my general impression is that there's really nothing substantial to be gained from either bellyaching about the fact that you seem to lack experiences, or sort of condemning that. I just don't understand the motivation behind either of this. I don't feel like successful people are doing either of these things. I don't feel like it behooves millennials to sit there and say, well, we're obviously the first generation that works this hard for this amount of money, and here's a cherry-picked stat to support what I'm trying to say. And it sure doesn't behoove other people to be like, well, here's 4 cherry-picked stats that show you're full of it, and by the way, I made it on nothing. Like, I lived on minus $5 for the first 3 years of my life, and look at me now. I don't understand this whole back and forth, and I feel like it's really unproductive. And I've really seen a lot of minds changed on Facebook. I see it all the time. The people change their minds. They go on there. No one has ever changed their mind on social media. Like, I'm fairly certain of this. Whether it's politics or who is more hard done by, no one, I have yet to see anyone be like, oh, good point. I've completely changed my mind now.
I kind of wonder how much of this, too, is the unreasonable expectations that a lot of millennials come out of school with. They've been promised the world by the schools that they're going to. They have to justify these huge student loans that they're taking out, or that they're giving to these kids, and so they promise them the world, and you're going to be making a lot of money, and so they come out with these unreasonable expectations of what they're going to be starting out at. And they come out with $30,000 or $40,000 worth of debt, and they decide, I'm going to work at an expensive city. I'm going to work in San Francisco at a starting salary of $30,000 a year or something, and you just can't live on that. They just have these unreasonable expectations of what they're going to be doing. So it's kind of a compounded thing. There's blame to go around, to the institutions, to the students themselves for having these unreasonable and crazy expectations of what they're going to see in the job market. And it's just kind of a snowball effect.
I think social media has contributed to that too, Peter, because I've read a lot on sort of the mentality and psychology behind it, and we tend to all post what we're like most proud of, or sort of the persona that we want to project on social media often, and so then the keeping up with the Joneses factor, I imagine, gets like exponentially raised when you can always see like, oh my goodness, look at the engagement ring that they got. Now there's pressure. Everyone knows now how big that engagement ring is, right? Or, man, look at the house they just got. That's a beautiful house, and everyone's got housing envy. And I feel like that's always been there to some degree, obviously. The phrase predates Facebook and Twitter, but I think it's made it worse. I don't know. Everything I've read seems to lean in that direction.
Yeah, it's part of the everybody gets a trophy generation. You know, everybody wants to have it and have it now, whether they deserve it or not. So.
Yeah. Well, and one of the things I found interesting with this story was not only did she, she's complaining about, well, I'm not making enough money to pay for housing and food and everything else in San Francisco, which is a really expensive city and it is very hard to get by. But then she posted her donation stuff, because, I'm having a hard time now come donate to my cause. So there was that aspect of it too. Yeah. Well, and that's the thing. So, I mean, there are some days that I'm just sitting here going, what am I doing? Maybe I should just...
It goes back to this idea, too, of nobody wants to sacrifice anything to get ahead these days. They just want everything handed to them. I kind of remember hearing about the story, and they were going through this girl's Instagram or something along those lines, and, here she is, living in this apartment that was, $2,000 a month or something. Her starting salary was like, $3,200 a month, and then she's eating out sushi every other night, and she's doing all these expensive things. It's she wants to live the lifestyle, but she doesn't want to have to pay for it, basically.
Well, and here's the thing I didn't understand, and truthfully, I don't understand about whether you're talking about San Francisco or Vancouver. Is okay, so she's got a side gig as a freelance writer. And again, now I'm piling on, picking on this poor girl. So let's say hypothetically you're a freelance writer, since we have a few of those in our line of work. Miranda, your lifestyle as a freelance writer, I'm going to go out on a limb here and say it would be a little bit cramped if you moved into the middle of San Francisco and started paying for like a loft apartment, and wanting to live the life. And frankly, you don't need to live in San Francisco to do your job, right?
Oh, no. Well, and that's actually kind of a funny story because I really liked living in Philly and living an hour train ride from New York City, and it made me happy to live there. And when I got the divorce, when my husband asked for the divorce, I looked at the situation and I said, well, one, I need support. I need my family support. And two, I will be better able to care for my son if I move back to Idaho Falls and have half the costs. And so that's
Philly isn't San Francisco.
No. And yeah, my rent is exactly half what I was paying before, and the house that I live in is almost twice the size of the apartment I had before. And so I'm paying half the price and I have twice the space for my rent, and my food costs are lower, and my transportation costs are lower, and my power costs are lower. So yeah, when you that's one of the interesting things, is you kind of have this weird conflict, because on the one hand, you do have quite a few millennials who are minimalists and they are frugal, and you can see that they're, look at you, Kyle, and you can see that they're not spending. But on the other hand, you have, others who are, different, I guess. I don't know. So.
Well, and just, yeah, I mean, like Peter said, there's a sacrifice that has to be made at some point. Very few people can have it all right away, and if you can have it all right away, you probably are working a job that's 80 or 90 hours a week, and then you don't have it all. So a lot of these folks, like, yeah, there's thriving downtowns in San Francisco. I'm sure it's a great, fun place to be. I'm sure downtown Vancouver is gorgeous, and it's a fun place to be. But like, I truthfully, I don't understand the premise of, I need to live right here. Oh my God, my rent's too high to live. Like, I don't know. I guess it's because I've always lived outside the mainstream, so I have a completely skewed view, and they probably think I'm insane living like a caveman, I suppose. But there is a world outside of these sort of meccas of hipsterdom that does exist, and there's great wages to be had, and even if they're moderate wages to be had, there's great standards of living to be had. And I think that's overlooked a lot. So I know that I've revisited this point a few times on a couple of shows, but looking outside of these sort of downtown, very millennial, fun lifestyles can really help you build for that future. Whatever you want that future to be, it can really help, I think.
So what are some things then? Let's move away from bagging on the millennials all the time and.
Oh, it's so much fun.
I know, right? Because it helps us ignore the own problems with us Gen Xers, right? The slacker generation.
By the way, as a teacher, I need to point out, guess what? The millennials didn't raise themselves, or maybe they did, and that's the problem. But someone is responsible for those guys before they didn't just fully develop into 20-year-old people that were obsessed with sushi and $2,000 rentals. That came about. Someone projected that.
Are you telling me that Gen Xers are bad parents?
I don't know if bad is the word. Demanding that your kid get a trophy. What did you think was going to happen there? Young baby boomer, old Gen Xer. Like, hello, that was going to have repercussions.
So let's shift gears a little bit. What can you do to improve your money situation? Tom, what is the first thing that you think millennials ought to be doing to improve their financial situations?
Well, one thing I actually read today, just came out today, that's kind of a good sign is that millennials are increasingly turning to things like Betterment and Wealthfront, or here, Wealthsimple. So they're turning to the robo investors, and so it's a good sign that partly because they don't trust the big banks and everything like Kyle said earlier, but also they're just more tech savvy anyway. So something like a robo advisor is a perfect fit for them. And if they don't, certainly if they don't want to even deal with that kind of stuff, then it really is a good fit, and they are turning there. So there is some hope. It's not that they may not trust the big banks and everything, but it's not that they're completely oblivious. They are catching on.
Yeah, for sure. And one of the things that's great about these new kind of robo-advisors and new investment opportunities is that they're low cost, and you don't need a lot of money to start. You can invest with your first job. You can get started investing, and that's one of the nice things about them. What about you, Peter? What do you think something that millennials can do, or really anyone, honestly, can do to start improving their finances?
Well, one thing they can do is just start cracking away at that debt as fast as they can. It seems like that's really one of the big issues that's kind of holding millennials and everybody else back these days. When in the past decade, this student loan indebtedness has gone up by like 85% or something. So really, you do need to start even before you get to that point and think about maybe trying to pay for your education a different way, or paying for it as you go, or something along those lines. But once you get out of college, just start working on that debt as fast as you can to get it paid off as fast as you can. Because otherwise, it's going to be an anchor that's just holding you back.
Yeah, and that's one of the depressing things about the student loan debt is they've done the studies that say that people are putting off buying homes because of their student loan debt. They're putting off marriage. They're putting off children. They're putting off things that not everybody wants these things, but people who do want them are putting them off because they feel like they can't afford them because of all of that student debt. And I know in the past I've been like, oh, well, I'm not worried about my student debt and I'm not paying off my student debt fast, but I was able to consolidate my student debt at a 1.9% interest rate. And that's not really an option for most of the kids getting out of school right now. The interest rates are much higher now than they were when I left school. So that's a big deal. What do you think, Kyle? What do you think is something that millennials should be doing to improve their finances?
I think millennials really need to leverage their tech savvy and just their comfort level with the internet and just read. I'm going to name drop here a little bit. I was at a conference in Canada here, and I got a chance to talk to David Chilton, who wrote The Wealthy Barber, which I think even got some traction in the U.S. as well as Canada. And I said, if you had one piece of advice for my students, Mr. Chilton, what would it be? And he said, just read. Read. Which is, of course, my students weren't really too keen on following that advice. But suffice it to say, there is more great information up there than at any point in human history, and it's so easily accessible. I know that we all have a lot of demands on our time. If you can spare a couple hours every once in a blue moon to catch up and benefit from reading, learning from other people's mistakes, learning from other people's reading, you can read their summaries of books if you want. And get, say, 70% of the good information. I hate advocating for that as a teacher, but I really think that's so key, that there's just so much good stuff out there, and if you put in a little bit of time, man, you can see a massive benefit.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And I think, too, the knowing your information and reading and getting to know that stuff can actually help you feel more confident in your money decisions. I think there's, especially when it comes to investing, and we're always talking about how important it is to invest. I think when we're talking about investing, confidence is a real issue. So, yeah. And so I think we're about ready to wrap up here. And we go around and we do our final word, and let's go ahead and do that now. Let's start with you, Peter. What is your final word on millennials and money?
Well, final word is this. Millennials, they don't have everything going against them. They do have things going, like not as many of them have credit cards as some of the other generations do. I saw a study in Bankrate that 60% of millennials don't even have a credit card at this point. And, part of that may be because they're less trustful of big banks and stuff like that. But what they can do is harness that, credit averse nature and use it to their advantage and pay off their debts. Do your best to, not try to live in the moment and spend money on everything that comes your way, because we're in such a consumer culture these days. It's so hard to get away from that. But, have some sacrifice. Don't do everything. Don't spend money on everything. Do some sacrifice and think about your future.
Okay, and what about you, Tom? What is your final word?
Well, here in Canada, I see a lot of bad things coming. I see that real estate's starting to go down, employment rates getting worse. But so whether it's advice to millennials or maybe to everybody, like if you have high debt, that's certainly something you should take care of first. Certainly don't feel entitled to your job because it could be gone the next day. Just take care of your money, get that debt down, and be prepared, because it might get a little rocky here in Canada for the next few years.
Hey, and what about you, Kyle? What's your final word?
I'm going to strike a mighty blow back on behalf of millennials here and say, statistically speaking, what you should do is look at what your parents did, and if you do the opposite, more often than not, you should probably be okay. So if they bought a large house, buy the small house. If they got a new car and leased it, or they bought a new one every 5 years, which they statistically probably did, do the opposite of that. And if you just do the opposite, most of you will probably be better off.
Great point. All right, well, thank you for joining us today on the Money Mastermind Show. You can check us out at moneymastermindshow.com. Don't forget to go ahead and subscribe to us on iTunes and Stitcher. And, tweet at us, send us a question, whatever, and we'll try and pay attention to it and maybe answer it someday. But yeah, so go ahead and check us out. We also have a Facebook page. And until next week, be good with your money.
Thanks for joining us on the Money Mastermind Show. Get more information at moneymastermindshow.com. Don't forget to subscribe to the show on iTunes and YouTube, and follow us on Google+.